Welcome back, everyone. Glad to be back here, I think, this morning. Sort of a fun upset to all the rhythms. Made me feel like a little kid again. So this week, we are going to work through 158, 165, 66, and 127. In terms of bills from other committees, so that next week we have time for all of the other many bills that will come to us this week. And then we are also going to try to find time for, our miscellaneous tax bill, which to my knowledge, we basically completed and we were just waiting to see if there's anything else that needed to go in there. So if you have concerns about that, let me know. And the property value modernization bill, tax is still looking at that. And so we'll have conversations about that. Not sure if we'll be able to finish that this week or not. And then a bunch of bills that we'll pick up next week. And then any Senate bills that come over in the meantime, we're not going to pick up until after crossover, in case you were feeling curious about that. So today, starting off with H66, Damian has made like a few little tweaks for a final bill that he can take us through. We have a final fiscal note that we're going to go through. But really, this is our opportunity this afternoon to have our final policy conversation on the bill, as we've been really sort of focused on more of the details and less of the big picture up until now. So Damian, if you want to join us for a minute and just talk us through the few changes that you made.
Happy to. I'm just logging into the Zoom meeting right now. So while I'm doing that, for the record, I'm Damian Leonard from the Office of Legislative Counsel. And we're going to be looking at draft 4.2, which I believe Sorcia's posted at this point. And it's a little bit different than the draft 4.1 that I sent to the committee members last night. There were a couple additional changes that were, issues with the bill that needed to be corrected that were brought to my attention by Cameron Wood from the Vermont Department of Labor. So he noticed some language that was ambiguous, and so I've made that correction in this draft. Let me go ahead and share my screen and I'll start walking the committee through. Okay, so I'm gonna skip down here. I apologize for scrolling. A lot of pages with no changes at all. Okay, we are getting close, I promise. There we go. So the first change is just to reflect the different start date.
What page you're actually on now?
Yes, I'm on page 23, on line 12. Sorry about that. That is my characteristic thing that I forget to do, is tell people where we are in the bill. I don't know how you guys can't read my mind at this point. So this is just updating the date from January 1, 2026 to July 1, 2026 to allow for additional funds to accrue in the fund for the program. And again, in the eligibility section, we've updated from January to July. The next change, this is what Cameron Wood from Vermont Department of Labor highlighted for me. So this is in the eligibility. And so this gets to the wages or self-employment income. So there are two options. And so option one is the individual has earned wages from which contributions were withheld during at least 2 calendar quarters in the preceding calendar year. 2 is made contributions on covered work income in at least 2 calendar quarters in the preceding calendar year. And 3 is both. And then or, and the clarification is here on lines 5 and 6 of page 25. If the individual does not meet the requirements of subdivision A, then the individual has earned wages or self-employment income in 2 of the last 4 calendar quarters on which contributions were paid. So this reflects the discussion we had before the break about this being your standard base period is 2 calendar quarters from the prior calendar year. If you don't have that, then you can provide documentation of your income in 2 calendar quarters from the last 4. So this is similar to what we do for unemployment insurance, where it's a little bit different there, but it's first 4 of the last 5 calendar quarters, last 4 of the last 5, last 3 plus the current calendar quarter.
Please don't explain unemployment test. And this is particularly important because self-employed folks don't necessarily communicate their income on a quarterly basis. And so this way we can look into past year.
Right.
To match up with their tax filings.
And the same thing with wages. So employers send in their withholding on a quarterly basis, but they don't report by Social Security number except at the end of the year. So that means that our basic reporting is going to be on an annual basis. If you don't qualify for that, the way the program is set up now is that individuals can provide alternative documentation of that income, could be pay stubs, et cetera, that the department will develop by rule. And then that will allow them to qualify if, for example, they just started working in Vermont in the last 6 or 8 months. Okay. Other questions on that? Okay. Skipping ahead, we can again skip a lot of Bill here. We're going to go to almost the very end of the draft. I'm sorry that you have to watch the screen.
We don't have to, we can look.
Yes, I recommend it. Okay. And then this gets us back into the definitions. We're now on page 46, the definition of average weekly earnings. So A is qualified wages and net earnings from self-employment from the prior calendar year. B is if the individual did not have wages or earnings from self-employment during at least 2 calendar quarters in the prior calendar year, 2 of the last 4 where it's documented. So that just makes our definition of average weekly wages, which determines your benefit, consistent with our requirements for eligibility.
That's nice.
Okay. Righty. I think our next piece is the position language, which is new since we talked. Oh, actually, it's the appropriations. And Patrick will talk to you a little bit more about the amounts. Whoops, there's even the dates. Sorry, the report dates for the program. We changed this from January 15th, 24, 25, and 26 to December 15th of 23, 24, and 25.
Thank you, David.
You are very welcome.
When we were driving up, there was that like driving through the snow in the dark thing, you know, like Star Trek, and this is sort of like that, honey.
Fair enough. That's how my flight at the beginning of break was. Taking off, you could see the snow coming by the window.
Cool.
We got out right as the snow was hitting Logan Airport. So anyway, that's a big aside. So here are the appropriations amounts. Patrick will tell you about the adjustments, but these are adjusted because of the fact that we're appropriating out 2 fiscal years into the future. So we're dealing with some inflation, I think, and Patrick and Joyce will get into that more. And then also the amount here at the bottom has been adjusted down from what it was before. I think before it was 97 million or something like that. And so it's at 58 million now for the additional amount that needs to be in there for the reserve. Questions? Okay. And like I said, Patrick and Joyce can talk to you a lot more about it.
I think that's where the questions will come in.
Yeah. So Department of Taxes positions, these are 15 new permanent classified positions for fiscal year 2025. So not this coming fiscal year, the one after. So this is tax. They have 8 full-time tax examiners within the Taxpayer Services Division and an additional 2 in the Compliance Division. 3 tax compliance officers in the Compliance Division, a financial specialist in the Revenue Accounting and Returns Processing Division, and a business analyst within the VTax Division. So those are their 15 positions.
And often this is something that appropriations will do instead of us. We're just sort of trying to tidy things as a favor to them.
Right. And so these are the most current positions, and tax requested in particular that we include their positions at least in this draft, just so that they were on paper, knowing that appropriations may decide that they belong in the big bill next year or something like that. So with the Division of Family and Medical Leave in the Office of the Treasurer, I've broken it out by, so first we have classified positions for fiscal year 2024. That's an administrative assistant, a private insurance regulation supervisor, a financial and accounting supervisor, an IT director, an applications developer, and an IT service desk specialist. And then in the same year, FY24, 3 exempt positions, the director, the deputy director, and the general counsel. Moving on to FY25, there's 8 new classified positions that would come online at that point. 2 communications and outreach specialists, 1 administrative support specialist, 3 accounting support specialists, 1 claims supervisor, 1 assistant claims supervisor. And then the big addition is in FY26 when the program comes online. So that's 1 regulatory specialist, 15 claims processors, 5 claims adjudicators, and 3 compliance officers. So that's really when they staff up for the rollout of the program. One thing to note with all of these positions is they're added in the fiscal year. It doesn't necessarily mean they come online on July 1. This is just, they expect sometime in that 12 months to need to fill that position. So questions? Okay. We are almost done. I will yield to the far more interesting folks from Joint Fiscal. So the only 2 other changes here are in the effective dates, and we've just moved January 1, 26 to July 1, 26. And that is it.
Thanks.
Great. Thank you for your time.
All of your revisions.
Thank you, Jamie.
Yeah.
And for the timeline, which I love.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't know if folks noticed that you don't need to explain it to us. It's fairly self-explanatory, but
Yeah.
and I lost it somewhere, but it's incredibly helpful.
I hope that information was helpful. Please let me know if you have questions or if you're concerned that I might have missed something.
Just getting into the Zoom real quick. And then I can share my screen and we can look at the fiscal note, which I know everyone's been very interested in seeing. So I am Pat Titterton, as you all know. I'm from the Joint Fiscal Office. And is that working?
Yep. Thanks.
All right, so a couple of things. First thing you'll notice is that there are many more tables this time around. And the other thing you'll notice that I want to touch on right off the bat is that so far we have talked about all of the dollar figures in 2023 dollars. It's important that we think about them in terms of what the program costs are anticipated to be once benefits actually go live. So you will see that we have bigger numbers, right? We've inflated the cost of the benefits and administration, while at the same time increasing or growing the wage base. So you'll see the numbers look bigger, but the tax rate's unchanged because we're adjusting both proportionally. So just so we're all starting on from that point, that'll explain why the numbers are different, but we'll go into more detail on that. So we're still at 90%, 12 weeks, same types of leave for the same people. It's being run out of the treasurer's office, Department of Taxes collecting the taxes. They'll be paying, contributions will be 0.55% up to 2 times the Social Security maximum. That's all unchanged. We have the credit, which I know Damien recently added to the language, so I think we're familiar with the construct. We'll get into how much we think that'll cost. Now, right now in the bill, there's 3 appropriations. The first 2 have to do with costs incurred by the Treasurer's Office and the Department of Taxes prior to when they're, using the money coming in from the contributions. So we did have to, had a lot of good back and forth with them to kind of hone in on their numbers a little better. We have applied some expected increases for, wages going up. Every year people have their wages go up. And so when you think about what they're actually going to need, it's important to sort of look at it as like, what is the actual dollar figure that they'll need in that year? So we have made some adjustments for inflation based on that. The third one.
Can I back you up for 1 second?
Sure.
So what year will the payroll taxes going into the fund pay for every aspect of the program?
So you're starting to collect at the start of fiscal year 26, so July 1, 2025. And then, so you'll have 12 months of revenue collections in the bank by the time that benefits open up in July 1 of 2026 or the start of fiscal year 27.
Okay. And so all of the money we're sort of looking at is all money that needs to be sort of spent before that in order to pay for the program. But once the program's running, it's going to be paying for itself.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And
that just helps me sort of like map the conversation a little bit better in my mind.
yeah, and I have, there's a table further down here that shows each fiscal year leading up to when benefits open up, what each department's cost would be. So theoretically, you wouldn't need to appropriate the full amount upfront, but there will be a cost schedule showing you sort of when the money needs to be there and available to be spent.
Back to you. Sorry.
Yeah, so the third appropriation, as Damien referenced, is that chunk of money to fund the 50% for the reserve. So cover 6 months worth. And again, this was why it was important to start referring to the numbers in 2027 dollars. Because the figure I had showed previously was sort of the gap in funding that we were looking at if we were still based on 2023 dollars. But the actual amount you would need to reflect the costs you'd expect in 2027. So that was an important sort of adjustment that we had to make to sort of figure out what that number is going to be. That's another one where you need the money, you want the money in the bank once it starts.
Can I just ask how you made that adjustment? Did you look at what you're projecting inflation to be over the past?
Sure. So Joyce will fill in any gaps I miss here, but the Congressional Budget Office releases 10-year forecasts. And the piece that we went in to look at there was something called the Employment Cost Index, which gives you, it's meant to capture changes in compensation over time. Do you have anything you'd add to that?
We felt that the employment cost index is a better index to use than the CPI or the personal consumption expenditure index, because mostly we're looking at wages, right? We're looking at wages that are coming in to provide the tax base for the program. We're looking at benefits that are based on wages. We're looking at personnel costs for the maintenance, to keep the program going. So it seemed to us that the employment cost index was the best thing we could find.
Thank you.
Will you identify yourself?
Oh, sorry, Joyce.
So I think what I was saying was, that's another one where you want the money in the bank once benefits open up, so you have the reserve available, but you wouldn't necessarily need to have that out the door, sitting in an account, when, in fiscal year 24, you would be collecting interest on it. But it's not needed at that point in time. Something that you all can think about. So I think we can actually move.
Actually, I'd even say like, we are going to leave appropriations to think about that. We're going to send them the full amount and they can decide which years they want to be spending then.
Yep, that's entirely their prerogative. So I think I'll have a little bit more information on some of these figures in later tables, but if we're all good, we can continue moving down and looking at the special fund. So in 2027, between the refund, the cost of benefits and cost of administration, we're anticipating that to cost about $117.6 million. Again, the payroll tax is going to be unchanged because we're also accounting for growth in the wage base at the same time. But that's the figure that I think last time I was here is about 94 million. That's the inflation adjusted figure that we would expect to see in 2027 or fiscal year 2027, excuse me. So Treasurer's Office, we're still anticipating about $11 million in ongoing costs split between personnel and IT maintenance, Department of Taxes. We have applied some inflation adjustments to them using the same index that we were just talking about. So before you would have seen 2.0 or $2.1 million. Here it's been adjusted to account for $2027, and that's bringing it to about 2.4 million. Yep. So and then just looking at the benefit payments piece, so not including the refund or the credit, or sorry, the refund or the administration. That's a 94.1 million. And then the cost of the refundable credit, we're anticipating to be about 10.2 million. Now, one thing I'll note about that, even people who are eligible for credits, they don't file their taxes at 100% rate. So it is possible that this number could be a little bit lower, but it'll really depend on whether people are actually claiming the refunds that they're entitled to. So the rate 0.55, we set this up in the model so that the rate will calculate exactly what we're expecting the cost to be. So we're expecting it to raise 117.6 million for the special fund to have in the account for when it opens up. And that is something that the rate gets adjusted every year to account for, whether the reserve needs a little more money or if benefits have gone up or down. So this is just for the initial period. So the reserve fund is that additional 58.8 million, where we get to that just by taking half of the 117 million. Relatively simple calculation there, but that is what that figure is in the table above for the reserve. Were there any other questions on that particular appropriation? Moving on. This is mostly language talking about the setup of the special fund and, what roles the Treasurer's Office and the Tax Department have. I think Damien's given you a lot of information on that, so we can move down to a breakdown of what we're anticipating sort of ongoing costs to be at those two departments starting in 2027. So again, these are numbers that have been adjusted for inflation. thank you. Thanks to the treasurer's office, they actually did the adjustments for us. But we have updated the numbers at tax overall. I think before we were at 13.1 million. When you looked at it before, with the adjustments, we're talking about 13.4 million. And these are ongoing annual costs that would be covered by the contributions. This is, we built this cost into the modeling so that it's being paid for on an ongoing basis and wouldn't need to be appropriated for every year.
Patrick, for the treasurer, you don't have anything fee for space, is that, did you already say why not, or do you have the space? Or?
That's a good question. They didn't communicate to us at any point that they were anticipating any costs associated with that.
Okay.
And sort of similarly, I was actually surprised to see the fee for space for tax because I feel like they have a fairly abundant amount of space going on over there.
And then the other thing, so that, I just a little rough math, but it looks like about $140,000 per FTE. Pay people that much to do that job, or?
So there's a couple of things. Are you looking at the tax line item there?
Yeah, it was like, 15 EP.
Yeah.
FTE is 2.1 million.
So I don't know if Damien received any expected cost per type of employee, but I will say that there is a range in terms of the level of job that they're doing. So they would sort of fall within the regular pay scale. But the other thing that number also includes is the cost of any benefits they're receiving. So their health insurance, for example, or payments into their pension fund.
140,000. Okay.
Okay, and we're coming up quickly on another table. This is going to show us the breakdown of costs incurred at Treasury and tax prior to them having access to the contributions. So combine those two together, we're expecting to have about $52.6 million in an initial setup cost. So during a period of time when they don't have access to the special fund, essentially. And if we look at this table, you can see how that breaks down by year. So in fiscal year 24, the two combined would be that bottom line there. So about $3.8 million. All of those costs would be at the treasurer's office. Fiscal year 25, all those costs for both departments would be about 24.5 million. And then taking one step further, it's about $24.3 million in fiscal year 26. All of that put together is 52.6 million. But you can see here kind of a window into what we would expect their cost to be per year. So it gets back to that whole discussion that appropriations will worry about when do you actually appropriate the money. But this would be when they need it for their startup costs. Anything in this table? Great. So we've talked about some of this earlier on in the summary section, but again, no change in the tax rate, still 0.55%. It's going to raise 117.6 million. We have again that appropriation for the reserve. And I think we've gone through the meat of the numbers here. So I can talk about some of the background, but I know we've had a lot of discussions about it. So unless there are other questions or you want me to go into anything further.
I think.
Can you scroll back to that table?
Sure.
For the 15 million each for those 2 years of IT set up for the treasurer.
Mm-hmm.
How does that relate to inflated dollars? What are we? Are those 26 ones? Are those inflated dollars?
So we didn't inflate those dollars for a couple of reasons. First of all, it'll be established through a contract, and once the contract rate is set, that's kind of what you're going to be paying. The second being, Joyce and I, in looking at other states, have found quite a range of actual IT setup costs. We could theoretically inflate it. We don't know really in that space what to account for. But again, I think this is an estimate that was provided by the treasurer's office from their due diligence. And we have seen numbers quite a bit higher, but we've also seen some that were lower, so.
So it's kind of a ballpark number.
Yeah, it's really what it'll end up coming down to is what they accept as a bid,
Okay.
in that negotiated amount.
And I remember the treasurer talking about those numbers being sort of like I think they were inflating it as they gave it to us for the IT costs a little bit.
They inflated all of the other pieces that they gave us, so I have no reason to think that they did not in this case.
Send it back with you.
Yeah, so let's say hypothetically, the way this bill is drafted, let's say the IT setup costs balloon to $40,000. Do we just hear loud screams from appropriations, or does the rate that people pay adjust to cover that cost?
That's a great question. So right now, the rate is just meant to cover ongoing costs. So it's not meant to cover implementation costs. Theoretically, you could increase the rate if you wanted to collect for unforeseen costs. The other option would be
Loud screams from appropriations.
loud screams from appropriations, right? So there are a few different mechanisms, I guess you could say you can use. But right now, the rate is just meant to cover those ongoing pieces.
All right, thank you.
Well, thank you.
Okay.
No other questions on the fiscal note from anyone? Okay, thanks.
We're all to look at it. Jensen Maslin has lost the coffee cup.
We want to search there first break.
Yeah, well, somewhere.
Any thoughts on the bill? Yes.
I think it's fine. It's expensive, we know that. Presentation has told us that all the way through, but assuming we do it, we know what we're doing and why we're doing it, and we'll see what the Senate does, We don't rely on there to make things better, but that this is a team sport here.
Teamworks are always good. But speaking of expensive, did somebody do a side-by-side on what it would cost for us to run it and what it is costing for them to run it? Or did I dream that?
Who's them?
Yeah, who's us?
Jane Frisco.
No,
Also Trump. But
but who's for them to run it? Who are them? Who's running it?
Oh.
Or us to run it? Hartford. So we got a letter from the Hartford about that. Maybe you didn't dream it. And while they can tell us the numbers for how much it would cost for them to provide non-comparable benefits
Right.
to state employees, because I'm not the Hartford, and I'm just quoting my memory of the letter, which I read, I think, last week. So forgive me or correct me. Because it's the type of insurance program where they set different rates based on the experience rating of each individual employer who's asking for a rate, they can't tell us how much it would cost to provide comparable benefits statewide to what this bill does, because it would be a different rate that would change every year for each employer that was offering it.
so we don't know how this relates to what costs would be for the Hartford to do the same thing.
Nope.
We don't know that.
And it sounds like they're not able to offer that number to us.
But
Yeah.
I could extrapolate from that at a minimum, the plan that we have before us would be more stable for ratepayers potentially.
How do we know that? I keep forgetting to raise my hand. I'm sorry, Madam Chair. But how would we know that it's more stable?
Because we're setting the rate. Not the Hartford. You see what I mean?
Representative Meslin and then Simpson.
Well, to restate essentially what Julia said, if they have different programs in different years for different employers, if I work for you, you wouldn't be able to tell me next year, for instance, what my rate would be or my contributions would be. So if I want stability, I'd like to know at the beginning, when this program starts, what my status is encompassing. That's the way I understand it.
And just the other thing that, like I asked them when they were here and they, you know, responded was around the kind of profit margin and what, you know, their admin overhead is. And I think they weren't able to answer that either. And so again, what I guess appreciate about our approach here is we know what the positions are and what the IT costs are. And, you know, we are in some sense in control of that and we're transparently able to understand you know, what the expenses it takes to offer, you know, certain benefit packages to Vermonters. I think we're able to do a better job taking care of Vermonters when we take that on as a public good, as opposed to leaving it to a for-profit company.
Representative Canfield.
So the plan that the administration has, there's no cost to the employee. It's the state that's going to pay the whole premium
For state employees.
for state employees.
One thing that and I've spent way too much time in unemployment insurance funding, so forgive me, and even though I told Damien to stop talking about it. I think one of the things that's interesting about sort of, you know, the way unemployment insurance works, and most insurance works, right, is that it has this experience rating built into it. And so if you're using it a lot, it costs more. And I think for unemployment, that can create sort of an incentive for employers not to fire employees, right? Which is good for the public good, right? When employers are sort of incentivized to not fire employees. But it's not necessarily good for the public good if employers are incentivized not to have employees take leave when they need it, like medical leave, right? That's like not good for the public good. And so it's a place in public policy where I feel less comfortable having sort of an employer by employer experience rating happening, because I think it might create some perverse incentives for folks who already, like everywhere I've ever worked, I don't think I've ever worked anywhere where I felt supported to take the full leave I needed, because there's always like the pressure of the deadline. Just like here with all of us, yeah, Scott.
We don't have to ask the Hartford for an employer by employer rating system. We can ask them for a state rating system. And I would say, you know, as far as stability, it's the only thing that determines stability is whether the person projecting what the costs are going to be accurately reflect what the costs are going to be. I mean, myself, I'm inclined to think that a insurance professional that's been doing this kind of work for decades would have a better idea of what the usage rate, what this is all going to cost than a treasurer's or anybody else who's just never done this before. So I would say that trying to do this in-house in combination with the somewhat unknown IT costs is far more unstable than going with professionals that do this for a living.
Yeah, I understand what Representative Beck is saying, but I also think we've, you know, JFO and Damien and others and who've worked on this bill have seen what's happened in a lot. I mean, there are 14 other states that have similar programs, and I think they've been able to sort of scale this to Vermont and look at what it costs those states and look at how they did it and how they stood their programs up. And I mean, that's not like we're not really reinventing the wheel here. We're sort of taking pieces from other states' programs to sort of fit them to Vermont's.
Yeah, it's funny, through the pandemic, I was feeling very sad that this hadn't passed previously, but now I'm sort of, you know, today grateful for the extra time that we had to figure stuff out. Representative Brannigan.
I think what we're looking at from maybe a 30,000 foot level is something on which we are never going to agree. Scott and I agree. You and I don't agree. And that is whether or not government does it better or individual business does it better. That's a fundamental thing on which I will not change.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think we just need to find where the common ground is and land there.
Mm-hmm. I appreciate you naming that, because I think that that is sort of the fundamental difference in this bill. And I've appreciated that I think we've all participated really actively in sort of the sculpting of all of the details around the bill. And then it's just sort of, you know, sitting with that center of public versus private and what's best for Vermonters.
Yeah, appreciate that as well. And I think just want to share that one takeaway for me as we've dug into this issue is the importance of the variety of different benefits that we can make available. Yeah, as a parent of small children was going into this being like, wow, I remember the financial pressure that sent me back to work earlier than I or my body or my kid maybe were because of that lack of access to a benefit program. And so understood that as a parent, but understanding the medical benefits, and actually most eye-opening for me was the safe leave conversation, to see the JFO estimates about the number of Vermonters that you might expect to take advantage of safe leave because they're experiencing domestic violence, and having access to a benefit program might help people leave really unsafe situations was pretty eye-opening to me. And so appreciate how comprehensively we've thought about bereavement leave, the full list, as well as the inclusive definition of a family. I think, this is a lot of one-time money. I guess I see this as an investment in Vermont and our workforce. Hearing that small businesses in other states that have had employees take advantage of this program or a similar program walk away feeling even more positive about the program than before they started, and that folks are seeing longer-term workforce retention benefits. This is a big one-time investment, but hopefully sets up a self-sustaining insurance program that allows Vermont to invest in its workforce for the future in a way that really takes care of people and helps them stay at their jobs long-term. And appreciating this opportunity to have this conversation with you all about it, how we do it.
Well, Vermont's not investing anything in its workforce. We're pulling this money out of people and businesses' pockets. Not a Vermont investment. That's who's paying for it is businesses and individuals.
Yeah. I'm not sure I understand the difference.
I think as we heard from the employer of the Julie manufacturer, this is something that he's not currently able to offer his employees, but the state helping stand up the infrastructure to make these benefits available for a 0.55% payroll tax. From his perspective, was framed as a support for his business and his workforce. The math of the 0.55% on an annual $50,000 income is $250 split by the employer and the individual. $125 a year to be able to retain your job and your income if you have a medical event that's unexpected, or someone in your family passes away and you need to take care of their estate. That does seem like, to me, a modest investment by employers and employees to stand up something that helps care for people and do their work long term.
So, given what Representative Brannigan said, I don't know if we need to sort of debate this into the ground. If no one has any other sort of ideas they want to throw into the mix, I'm happy to have a motion.
Just to restate, who could do it more efficiently? Hartford, for instance, or in state. We do have examples from other states that have stood up similar programs. They were looked at, I think, fairly extensively by JFO and the people who got, worked up this bill. So we're not going into this blind in any respect.
I would really like to see it work. I'd like the idea of it. I'm hoping that, I think comparisons with other states, I found it really difficult because of the wide variety of different programs offered and benefits. So I think we are, to some extent, we're taking a risk, and I think the risk is justified, and I'm hoping, perhaps naively, that we can keep an eye on it as it's being developed over the next 3 years and make adjustments as to how much the funds actually, how do they build. We can start seeing how much it gets utilized during the first year, and I'm thinking we can make adjustments and back off if we need to. I would have preferred some sort of a stepwise approach, but I understand that the difficulties of that. And I'm hoping that people in the legislature keep a close eye on the finances of it as we're going along. And there's checkbacks and we can make adjustments. But it's an idea that I've witnessed throughout the world. I support it. I think it's good, but I think we just have to proceed cautiously. It's a risk, and I'm myself am willing to take the risk.
Maybe I misunderstood you, Jim, but have you seen, or has anybody seen from JFO a comparison of what they think an insurer would charge for this service versus what the state is prepared to charge for this service? I mean, I haven't seen that comparison, but maybe I just missed something on the way. Is that what you're saying?
What I'm hearing is, what I thought I heard, let's try that, We had the testimony from the woman from Denver.
Right.
And she said what they were capable of doing, what they'd be willing to do, but it's very different from what we're proposing in this bill. And so therefore, as I think a few minutes ago, it's not possible to do a side by side, an apples to apples kind of comparison.
Okay.
What I did hear was testimony from Tom Stevens and others that are some in the room about what other states have done and what the costs have been done, what the costs have been, and what's offered and what the results have been. And that was pretty good testimony, I think, on a comparison basis. Our program versus Oregon or Connecticut or Rhode Island, I can't remember just which ones, but we heard quite a bit of that, so.
Okay, and I mean, but I think those were state to state comparisons.
Correct.
And I mean, what I heard the lady from the Hartford say, I don't remember what her name was, but was that if you want to know what this benefit and these eligible categories is going to cost, then, we need to ask a number of insurers, what would you charge for this? And we don't know that because, none of the policy committees before it got to us, I guess, have ever even asked the question. But maybe I'm wrong. Joyce.
Yes, hi. So I may need to bring up some history here, but some of you will remember that back in 2019 or 2020, the Senate Economic Development Committee was going right down the path of a third-party administrator. And so this would say, we're gonna have this sort of a program, we're gonna hand it over to an insurance company in order to run the program. And we got costs. There was an effort to get responses back from insurers. We got costs, and the trade-off was quite clear. So in a public program, the public, the state government, has to provide the reserve and the sort of startup costs, right? And so that's a big upfront investment, and then the ongoing running costs are significantly lower because you've got that reserve and startup costs in the bank, essentially, right? You've done that part, and then you're just running the program from there on out. So the insurance company or the third-party administrator is going to charge you an administrative fee that would include the sort of capitalized cost of having that reserve and having the infrastructure on hand to run the program, right? So it's really a trade-off between, do you want to make the upfront investment and run the program at a public level, or do you want to hand off the entire business to a third-party administrator and pay on a year-by-year basis for those administrative costs that includes the profit margin and the opportunity cost of the reserve and so forth and so on. So I mean, we studied that model back then. And it didn't make it to the finish line, but we have some of those numbers, from 4 years ago.
And it was an apples to apples comparison, same eligibility, same benefits, same everything.
Well, so the policy started off as a state-run program, and then at some point it switched over to becoming a third-party administrator. So we have where we started, which is much like what we're doing now. And then we have, what were the bids like from, or the RFIs, responses from the insurance companies, and how much would they charge to run the program, so.
But none of the policy, I mean, at least this year, none of the policy committee or committees that have had this bill before us they haven't done that same comparison.
No.
Any further discussion?
Appreciate the member from Georgia's conversation or comments about philosophical differences, and I think that I agree with her on that one, and I would prefer to see this program run by a state out of the treasurer's office, I think, rather than a private entity. And I think there were probably very similar conversations and debates had when UI first came into being, and I'm happy to see that run by the state. And I would be, I see this, I really do see this as a workforce effort, and probably one of the biggest ones the state has made in its entirety. And not, UI was federal, but this is us. This is Vermont deciding that we're gonna do this. We're gonna get this started for our employees because we want to see them less stressed. We want to see them happier, and we think that it should be administered by a public agency because we feel that strongly about them. And I'm very comfortable with this. I know it's a big ticket here to get it started, but like I said, I see it as an investment, and I make a motion that we vote on the bill.
Go a second. Okay. Thanks. Any discussion, further discussion?
I'll second.
We seconded.
Okay, sorry.
You're welcome to third, but there's no line, I think, on the form for that.
That's okay.
Okay. Any further discussion?
Do we vote on the bill or not?
This is the bill, indeed, yes. This is
The
yes or
Ways
no.
and Means Amendment.
The Ways and Means Amendment to the bill, thank you, yes. And then we'll have a second vote on the bill as amended, if we amend it. Are you two ready, or do you have further discussion?
Yeah.
Yeah, go for it.
Andrews, yes. Anthony,
Yes.
Beck,
Yes.
Brannigan,
No.
Demro,
Yes.
Maslin.
Yep.
Matos,
No.
Odie,
Yes.
Sims,
Yes.
Yes.
Taylor, Canfield,
No.
Kornheiser.
Yes.
930. Yeah, 930, sorry. Rusty.
Thank you. And then a motion for the bill as amended. Representative Sims moved it, Representative Odie seconded. Any further discussion?
Andrews, yes. Anthony,
Yes.
Beck,
No.
Brannigan,
No.
Demro,
Yes.
Maslin.
Yep.
Matos,
No.
Odie,
Yes.
Sims,
Yes.
Taylor,
Yes.
Canfield,
No.
Kornheiser.
Yes,
840.
thank you. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate, I think this is the first really political bill we've worked our way through, and so I really appreciate us all doing that together. And so let's take like a 5-minute break, air out the room a little bit. And when we get back, we are going to,
Coffee cup search.
we can look for our coffee cups that are missing. And when we get back, we're going to talk about a fiscal note on the bottle
Can we do 2:50?
There's some others in the building.
at 2:50.